The cargo freighter Wandering Star shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of emergency deceleration. Captain Sarah Chun fought with the controls as warning lights painted the bridge in angry red shadows. The ship's AI spoke in its maddeningly calm voice, reporting hull breaches, engine failure, and life support running on backup power. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked, sweat beading on her forehead despite the dropping temperature. "At current power consumption, life support will fail in approximately 14 hours, the AI replied. "However, I am detecting a habitable planet within emergency shuttle range." Sarah looked at the readings scrolling across her screen. The planet showed breathable atmosphere, reasonable gravity, and abundant water. It also showed something else that made her stomach clench with fear. The electromagnetic signatures were unmistakable. This was Kythera space. The Kythera were legends told in whispers across human colonies. 8-foot-tall apex predators with natural armor plating, retractable claws that could slice through steel, and pack hunting instincts that had dominated their homeworld for millions of years. They had wiped out 3 different alien species that had attempted first contact. Their territory was marked with warning buoys in 17 different languages, all saying the same thing: death waits here. But death was already waiting aboard the Wandering Star. At least on the planet, she might have a chance. The emergency shuttle barely made it through the atmosphere before its engines died completely. Sarah managed a controlled crash landing in a dense forest of towering purple trees. She crawled from the wreckage, her emergency kit slung over her shoulder, and surveyed her surroundings. The air smelled of ozone and something floral she couldn't identify. In the distance, she could hear sounds that definitely weren't made by any Earth animal she knew. She was checking her supplies when she heard it. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Sarah froze, her hand instinctively moving to the small plasma pistol at her hip. The weapon would barely scratch a Kythera's natural armor, but it was all she had. The growling stopped. Then came the sound of something large moving through the underbrush, circling her position. Sarah turned slowly, trying to track the movement, but the forest had gone completely silent. Even the alien birds had stopped singing. When the attack came, it was from above. The Kythera dropped from the purple canopy like a living nightmare. It was even larger than the reports had suggested, its obsidian armor plates gleaming in the filtered sunlight. Its eyes were the color of molten gold, and when it opened its mouth, Sarah could see rows of teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. But something was wrong. The creature was moving oddly, favoring its left side. As it landed heavily in front of her, Sarah saw the wound. A deep gash ran along its flank, and darker blood was seeping through cracks in its armor. The Kythera was injured badly. For a moment, they stared at each other. Sarah could see intelligence in those golden eyes, a calculating awareness that was somehow more terrifying than simple animal fury. The creature was deciding whether she was worth the energy it would take to kill her. Then it collapsed. The massive predator hit the forest floor with a sound like a falling tree. Its breathing was labored, each inhalation a visible effort. Sarah remained frozen for long minutes, waiting for it to be a trick, waiting for the killing blow. But the Kythera didn't move. Slowly, carefully, Sarah approached. Up close, she could see that the wound was even worse than she'd thought. Something had torn through the creature's armor and deep into the tissue beneath. Without treatment, it would die within hours. The smart thing to do was walk away. Let the monster die and find somewhere to hide until rescue came. If rescue came. But as Sarah looked into those golden eyes, she saw something that stopped her cold. The Kythera was afraid. Not of her, but of something else. And in that fear, she recognized something painfully familiar. "You're not the only one having a bad day," she murmured, setting down her emergency kit. Sarah had trained as a field medic before becoming a cargo pilot. The anatomy was alien, but blood loss was blood loss. She pulled out her medical scanner and ran it over the wound. The readings were disturbing. Whatever had attacked, the Kythera had used some kind of energy weapon that was still eating away at the tissue. "This is going to hurt," she warned, though she doubted the creature understood her. The Kythera's eyes tracked her movements as she worked. Its claws flexed occasionally, each one as long as her forearm, but it made no move to attack. Sarah used her surgical laser to carefully remove the energy-corrupted tissue, then applied skin patches to close the wound. The creature's blood was darker than human blood, almost black, and it smelled like copper and ozone. When she was finished, the Kythera's breathing had stabilized. It turned its massive head to look at her, those golden eyes unreadable. Then, to Sarah's amazement, it made a sound that was almost like a purr, deep and rumbling in its chest. "You're welcome," she said, sitting back on her heels. That was when she heard the other sounds. More movement in the forest, but different from before. These were smaller, lighter footsteps, and there was something else. A high, keening cry that made the hair on the back of Sarah's neck stand up. The adult Kythera tried to rise, its muscles bunching with effort, but the injury was too severe. It fell back with a frustrated snarl, then looked at Sarah with what could only be described as desperation. The keening cry came again, closer this time. Sarah grabbed her scanner and moved toward the sound. What she found in a small clearing 30 meters away made her heart clench. 3 Kythera cubs huddled together beneath a fallen log. They were smaller than house cats, their armor plates soft and translucent. One was clearly injured, a burn across its tiny flank that matched the energy signature from the adult's wound. The other 2 were nuzzling it, making soft mewling sounds of distress. "Oh no," Sarah breathed. "What happened to your family?" She looked back toward where the adult Kythera lay. The creature's eyes were fixed on her, and she could see the plea in that alien gaze. It had been trying to protect its young when whatever attacked them had struck. Now it was too injured to care for them, and they were too small to survive on their own. Sarah made a decision that would have gotten her committed to a psychiatric facility on any human world. She approached the cubs. The 2 uninjured ones immediately arched their backs and hissed, tiny claws extending. But they were babies, and their threats were more adorable than frightening. Sarah knelt slowly and extended her hand, palm up. "It's okay," she said softly. "I help your parent. I want to help you too." The injured cub was barely conscious, its breathing shallow and rapid. Sarah carefully picked it up, and, to her surprise, the other 2 didn't attack. They followed her, mewing anxiously, as she carried their sibling back to where the adult waited. The adult Kythera watched as Sarah gently examined the cub. The wound was similar but smaller, and Sarah was able to treat it quickly. As she worked, the other 2 cubs climbed onto their parent, curling up against the warm armor plates. When she finished with the injured cub, Sarah found herself in a surreal situation. She was sitting in an alien forest, surrounded by creatures that could kill her without effort, treating wounds like some kind of interspecies veterinarian. "What attacked you?" she asked, though she didn't expect an answer. The adult Kythera made a series of low sounds, almost like speech. Then it lifted one massive claw and pointed toward the sky. Sarah followed its gaze and felt her blood run cold. High above the forest canopy, barely visible through the purple leaves, she could see lights moving in formation. Ships, and they didn't look like any design she'd ever seen. "Pirates," she wondered aloud. But even as she said it, she knew that wasn't right. Pirates didn't have energy weapons that could punch through Kythera armor. Pirates didn't hunt apex predators for sport. The lights were getting brighter, coming closer. Sarah looked at the wounded family around her and realized that whatever had attacked them was coming back. And this time, she was right in the middle of it. The adult Kythera struggled to rise again, but its injury made movement agonizing. It looked at Sarah, then at its cubs, and made a sound that needed no translation. It was asking her to run, to save herself while she still could. But Sarah had never been good at taking the smart option. She pulled her plasma pistol from its holster and checked the power cell. 15 shots, maybe 20 if she was careful. against whatever was coming. It might as well be a harsh word. "I'm not going anywhere," she told the Kithira. "We're in this together now." The adult's golden eyes widened with what looked like surprise. It made that purring sound again, softer this time. Then, it did something that nearly made Sarah drop her weapon. It spoke. The words were heavily accented, the vocal cords not designed for human speech, but they were unmistakably English. "Why do you stay, small one?" Sarah stared at the massive predator in shock. "You can talk. I learned from the ones who came before. The ones who screamed before they died." The Kithira's voice was like gravel in a cement mixer, but the intelligence behind it was clear. "You should run. They will return soon." "Who are they?" The Kithira's eyes darkened. "The Harvester. They take what they please from every world they find. They came for sport, to hunt the great predators of Kithira. They killed my mate. They burned my den. But my cubs—" The creature's voice broke slightly. "My cubs I want alive." Sarah felt sick. Whatever these harvesters were, they were collecting apex predators like trophies. And baby ones were apparently especially valuable. How long before they come back? Soon. They track the wounded. They like their prey to suffer. The lights above were definitely closer now. Sarah could make out individual ship silhouettes through the canopy. They were sleek and predatory like flying sharks with too many teeth. "Can you move at all?" she asked. The Kithira tried to rise and managed to get halfway up before collapsing again. "No." The energy weapon, it burned still, growing stronger. Sarah ran her scanner over the wound again. The alien energy was indeed spreading, eating away at the creature's natural healing ability. Without treatment, it would be dead within the hour, and the cubs would be helpless. "There has to be something," she muttered, scrolling through her scanner's medical database. Most of it was designed for human physiology, but there were some universal principles. She found what she was looking for in the radiation treatment protocols. "I can stop the energy burn," she said, "but it's going to hurt. A lot." The Kithira's golden eyes met hers. "Do what you must, small one. But when the harvesters come, you must run. Do not let them take you too." "My name is Sarah," she said, pulling out her surgical laser and adjusting it to maximum power. "And I told you I'm not running." As she began the delicate work of burning out the alien energy, the lights above grew brighter. Soon, the harvesters would land. Soon, she would find out exactly what she had gotten herself into. But as the three small cubs curled up against her legs, trusting her completely despite every instinct that should have told them she was prey, Sarah knew she had made the right choice. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. The harvester ships landed with the whisper-quiet efficiency of advanced technology. Sarah watched through the purple canopy as three vessels touched down in a clearing half a kilometer away. They were beautiful in the way that sharks were beautiful, all flowing lines and predatory grace. She counted at least 20 figures emerging from the ships, each one moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit. But these weren't soldiers. As they moved closer, Sarah could see through her binoculars that they were something far worse. The harvesters stood nearly 10 feet tall, their bodies covered in what looked like living metal that shifted and flowed across their forms. Where faces should have been, there were only smooth surfaces broken by clusters of sensors that glowed with cold blue light. They carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy, and their movements were too fluid, too perfect to be entirely biological. "Cybernetic slavers," the adult Kithira growled, its voice barely above a whisper. "They harvest the strong from every world they find. Some they keep as specimens. Others they remake into hunters for their amusement." Sarah felt her stomach turn. The cubs had pressed closer to her legs, sensing the approaching danger. The injured one had recovered enough to walk, but all three were trembling with fear. Whatever pheromones the harvesters gave off, they triggered pure terror in the young predators. "How many worlds have they hit?" Sarah asked, checking her weapon's power level again. "Dozens. Hundreds. They have been hunting across this sector for centuries. My people fought them when they first came. We killed many, but The Kithiera's golden eyes dimmed with old pain. They adapted. They learned our weaknesses. They began taking cubs, raising them in captivity, turning them into weapons against their own kind. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. The harvesters moved through the forest like ghosts, their sensors sweeping methodically through the underbrush. Sarah could hear them communicating with each other in a language that sounded like static and crystalline chimes. They're tracking the energy signature from your wound, Sarah realized. That's how they know where to find you. The Kithiera nodded grimly. The weapon leaves a trail they can follow. It was designed to mark prey for collection. Sarah's mind raced. The harvesters would be here in minutes, and she had no illusions about her chances in a straight fight. But maybe she didn't need to win. Maybe she just needed to survive long enough to think of something better. "Can you move at all now?" she asked. The adult Kithiera tested its muscles and managed to rise to a crouch. The surgical laser treatment had stopped the energy burn, and the creature's natural healing was finally kicking in. Some, but not enough to fight. "Then, we don't fight. We hide." Sarah looked around the small clearing where they had taken shelter. The fallen log that had originally sheltered the cubs was large enough to conceal them all if they squeezed together. It wasn't much, but it was better than standing in the open. "This way," she whispered, helping the cubs toward the hiding spot. But as they moved, one of the cubs stepped on a dry branch. The snap echoed through the forest like a gunshot. The harvester communication stopped instantly. Sarah held her breath as the forest fell into absolute silence. Even the alien birds had gone quiet, as if the entire ecosystem knew that death was walking among the trees. Then she heard it, a new sound, like a hunting dog following a scent. The harvesters were coming directly toward them now, moving faster. "Behind the log," Sarah hissed, shoving the cubs toward cover. The adult Kithiera squeezed in beside them, wrapping its massive form around the smaller bodies. Sarah pressed herself against the rough bark and tried to make herself invisible. The first harvester appeared at the edge of their clearing like a nightmare made manifest. Up close, Sarah could see that the flowing metal of its body was covered in tiny symbols that shifted and changed as she watched. Its sensor cluster swept back and forth, painting the area with invisible beams of light. More harvesters emerged from the forest, forming a loose circle around the clearing. One of them, slightly larger than the others and decorated with additional sensor arrays, stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of breaking glass. "We know you are here, Kithiera. Your young ones carry your scent. Surrender them, and we will grant you a swift death." The adult Kithiera tensed beside Sarah, muscles bunching for a charge. But Sarah put her hand on its armored flank, holding it back. Moving now would be suicide. The lead harvester tilted its head, sensors focusing on something. "Interesting. There's another scent here. Something new." It took a step closer to their hiding spot. "Human. How fascinating. We have not encountered your species before." Sarah's blood turned to ice. They knew she was here. "Come out, little human," the harvester continued, its voice carrying false warmth. "We mean you no harm. We are collectors of unique specimens. You would be quite valuable to our masters." The other harvesters spread out, cutting off any possible escape routes. Sarah could see their weapons powering up, energy building in crystalline chambers along their lengths. "Show yourselves, or we will flush you out with fire." Sarah looked at the 3 terrified cubs pressed against her legs, then at the adult Kithiera, whose golden eyes burned with helpless fury. These creatures had trusted her, had accepted her help despite every instinct that should have screamed at them to run. She couldn't let them down now. Slowly, Sarah stood up. "There you are," the lead harvester said with satisfaction. "Step away from the natives, human. You do not belong with such primitive creatures." "Actually," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I think I'm exactly where I belong." The harvester's sensor cluster focused on her with laser intensity. "You are either very brave or very foolish, little human. Perhaps both. No matter. You will make an excellent addition to our collection." I'm flattered, really, but I'll have to pass. Sarah raised her plasma pistol. The weapon looked pathetic against the Harvester's advanced armor and energy shields, but it was all she had. Behind her, she could feel the Kithira family tensing for what they all knew would be a final, desperate fight. The Harvester actually laughed, a sound like shattering crystal. A plasma weapon? How charmingly primitive. Do you seriously believe that toy can harm us? Probably not, Sarah admitted. But I figure it's worth a try. She fired. The plasma bolt struck the lead Harvester's energy shield and dispersed harmlessly. The creature didn't even flinch. Instead, it raised its own weapon, energy building to lethal levels. Amusing. Now surrender, or we will take you unconscious. That was when the adult Kithira moved. Despite its injuries, despite the odds, the massive predator exploded from cover with all the fury of its apex predator heritage. Its claws, each one as long as a knife blade, struck the nearest Harvester's shield and actually penetrated it. The creature's natural armor had been designed by millions of years of evolution to pierce and tear, and even advanced energy fields couldn't completely stop it. The Harvester shrieked as Kithira claws raked across its metallic hide, leaving deep gouges in the living metal. But the effort cost the wounded predator dearly. It collapsed after the single attack, breathing heavily. Impressive, the lead Harvester said, seemingly unbothered by its subordinate's injury. We will definitely be keeping that one. The young ones as well. They will make fine gladiators once we have properly trained them. More Harvesters emerged from the forest. Sarah counted at least 15 now, all with weapons trained on their small group. Even if the adult Kithira had been at full strength, they would have been hopelessly outnumbered. Last chance, human, the leader said. Surrender now, and we will allow you to live as a pet. Refuse, and we will simply take you anyway, but you will wish we had killed you instead. Sarah looked at the cubs huddled against her legs, their golden eyes wide with terror. She thought about all the other worlds these creatures had visited, all the families they had torn apart for their twisted entertainment. She thought about her parents, who had raised her to believe that sometimes doing the right thing was more important than doing the smart thing. You know what? She said, ejecting the power cell from her plasma pistol. I've got a better idea. Before anyone could stop her, Sarah grabbed one of her emergency flares from her kit and jammed it into the power cell's energy matrix. The combination was wildly unstable, potentially explosive, and definitely not recommended by any safety manual ever written. Human, what are you doing? The lead Harvester demanded. Something really, really stupid, Sarah said with a grin that was mostly fear and adrenaline. Want to find out what happens when you mix human engineering with sheer bloody-mindedness? The improvised bomb in her hands was already getting hot. She had maybe 10 seconds before the energy matrix destabilized completely. Enough time for one desperate gambit. Stay back, she warned the Kithira family. This is going to get messy. The cubs seemed to understand the danger and pressed themselves against their parent. The adult Kithira looked at Sarah with something that might have been respect. You fight with honor, small one, it rumbled. Honor's got nothing to do with it, Sarah replied, hefting the makeshift explosive. I'm just really, really bad at knowing when to quit. The Harvesters had begun to advance, their weapons charging to full power. Whatever they thought her little bomb could do, they weren't taking any chances. That was their first mistake. Sarah's improvised explosive wasn't designed to kill them. It was designed to do something much more useful. When the power cell detonated, it would release a massive electromagnetic pulse that would fry every unshielded electronic system within 100 meters. And, for all their advanced technology, the Harvester sensors were surprisingly vulnerable to good old-fashioned electromagnetic interference. Catch, Sarah said, and threw the bomb directly at the lead Harvester's feet. The explosion wasn't large, but it was bright enough to temporarily blind everyone in the clearing. When Sarah's vision cleared, she saw exactly what she had hoped for. The Harvesters were stumbling around like drunks, their sensor clusters dark and useless. Their weapons had shut down, their communication systems were silent, and Their perfect coordination had dissolved into chaos. Now, Sarah shouted. The adult Kithira didn't need to be told twice. Even injured, it was still an apex predator, and now the hunters had become the prey. It lunged forward with a roar that shook the forest, claws extended and ready for blood. But this was just the beginning. The electromagnetic pulse had done more than blind the harvesters. It had also activated every emergency beacon in Sarah's survival kit, broadcasting their location on frequencies that would be picked up by any ship within 50 light years. Help was coming. All they had to do was survive long enough for it to arrive. Chaos erupted in the forest clearing as the blinded harvesters staggered through the underbrush, their perfect coordination shattered. The adult Kithira moved like liquid death despite its injuries, using the confusion to strike at exposed joints and sensor clusters. Sarah grabbed the 3 cubs and pulled them toward the tree-line, away from the violence. But the harvesters were adapting faster than she had hoped. The lead harvester, its sensor array dark but its body still functional, began issuing commands in that crystalline language. The others responded by switching to backup systems, their movements becoming more coordinated even without their primary sensors. Within moments, they had formed a defensive circle, weapons raised, and ready to fire blind if necessary. "Human," the leader called out, its voice carrying easily through the forest. "Your electromagnetic trick was clever, but it has only delayed the inevitable. Our ships will triangulate our position and send reinforcements. You have perhaps 10 minutes before this forest is filled with our hunters." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had bought them time, but not enough. The emergency beacons would take hours to reach any rescue vessels, assuming there were any in range. And the harvesters' backup systems were already coming online. "We need to move," she whispered to the adult Kithira, which had retreated to her position after its attack. "Can you travel?" The great predator tested its wounded leg. "For a time. But the cubs cannot move quickly through dense forest." Sarah looked at the 3 small creatures pressed against her legs. They were still terrified, their golden eyes darting between the harvesters and the dark forest beyond. Moving through the wilderness with babies would be slow and dangerous. Staying here would be certain death. "There has to be another option," she muttered, then stopped. "Wait, your ships. Where did they come from?" "The ships?" "They came from above," from the Kithira's eyes widened with understanding. "The cave system. There are ancient tunnels beneath this forest. If we could reach them." "How far?" 2 kilometers north. "But the entrance is hidden and the passages are narrow." Sarah weighed their options. 2 kilometers through hostile forest with injured adults and terrified babies, pursued by cybernetic slavers with advanced technology. Or stay and fight an impossible battle with improvised weapons and sheer stubbornness. The tunnels it is, she decided. They began moving through the forest as quietly as possible, but stealth was nearly impossible with the cubs. The little ones were brave enough, but they were still babies, and every unfamiliar sound made them mew in distress. The adult Kithira tried to comfort them with soft rumbles, but the stress was taking its toll on all of them. Behind them, Sarah could hear the harvesters spreading out in a search pattern. Their backup sensors weren't as sophisticated as their primary arrays, but they were still more advanced than anything humanity had developed. It would only be a matter of time before they picked up the trail. "Tell me about these tunnels," Sarah whispered as they made their way through a grove of massive purple trees. "Who built them?" "The ancestors," the Kithira replied, its voice heavy with reverence. "They came before my people, before the forest grew. The tunnels run for hundreds of kilometers beneath the mountains. Some say they were built as shelters during the Great Burning. Others believe they were roads between cities that no longer exist. Are they safe?" The Kithira's laugh was bitter. "Safer than what follows us. But the deep places have their own dangers. Things that have lived in darkness for so long, they have forgotten what light means." Sarah suppressed a shiver, as if they didn't have enough problems. They had been traveling for perhaps 30 minutes when the first energy beam carved through the tree beside Sarah's head. She threw herself flat, pulling the cubs down with her as more shots followed. The harvesters have found them. "Run!" she shouted. The adult Kithira grabbed two of the cubs in its massive jaws, carrying them like a mother cat would carry kittens. Sarah scooped up the third cub and sprinted after the great predator as energy beams turned the forest around them into a nightmare of burning wood and superheated air. The harvesters were right behind them now, crashing through the underbrush with mechanical precision. Sarah could hear their leader issuing orders, coordinating the hunt. Whatever backup systems they were using, they were working well enough. How much further? Sarah gasped, her lungs burning from the effort of running while carrying a 20-pound alien baby. Close. Very close. But the entrance. The Kithira's words were cut off as an energy beam struck the ground at its feet, sending up a geyser of molten earth. The great predator stumbled, nearly dropping the cubs it carried. Sarah could see the pain in its golden eyes as its wounded leg finally began to give out. They weren't going to make it. But then Sarah saw something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. Ahead of them, barely visible through the trees, was a cliff face covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The ancient markings were beautiful and alien, clearly not made by any hand that still walked under this world's sun. "There," the Kithira panted. "The entrance is behind the waterfall." Sarah could hear water now, a distant roar that grew louder as they approached. Through the trees, she caught glimpses of white foam and mist. But she also heard something else. The distinctive whine of harvester weapons powering up for a killing shot. Time seemed to slow as Sarah saw the energy building in the weapons behind them. The lead harvester had a clear line of sight, its backup sensors locked onto the fleeing group. In seconds, they would all be dead or unconscious, ready to be loaded into the slavers' collection ships. That was when something impossible happened. The forest came alive. It started with a low humming that seemed to come from the trees themselves. The purple bark began to glow with the same light as the ancient symbols on the cliff face. Vines that had been dormant suddenly writhed to life, reaching out to entangle the harvesters' legs. The very ground beneath their feet began to shift and move. "What is this?" the lead harvester demanded, its voice carrying notes of confusion for the first time. Sarah felt the cub in her arms suddenly relax, its fear replaced by something like recognition. The other cubs were making soft, purring sounds, as if they had come home. "The ancestors," the adult Kithira whispered, wonder clear in its voice. "They left guardians. The forest remembers." The harvesters were fighting against the suddenly hostile vegetation, their energy weapons carving through vines and roots that regrew faster than they could be destroyed. But the delay was all Sarah's group needed. They reached the cliff face as the sounds of battle raged behind them. The waterfall was beautiful, a cascade of crystal-clear water that fell from heights lost in mist. But, more importantly, Sarah could see the entrance hidden behind it, a narrow opening in the rock, marked with more of the glowing symbols. "Quickly," the Kithira urged. "The guardians will not hold them for long." Sarah plunged through the waterfall, the shock of cold water nearly making her drop the cub she carried. But they made it through, into a tunnel that stretched away into comfortable darkness. The adult Kithira followed, still carrying two cubs. As soon as they were all through, the symbols around the entrance began to glow brighter, and Sarah heard a deep rumbling from within the rock. "The entrance seals itself," the Kithira explained. The ancestors were thorough in their protections. Behind them, the sounds of the harvesters' battle with the forest guardians were growing fainter. But Sarah knew they weren't safe yet. The slavers would find another way in eventually. They had to keep moving. The tunnel was wide enough for all of them to travel together, carved from solid rock with a precision that spoke of advanced tools and careful planning. The glowing symbols provided enough light to see by, casting everything in soft blue radiance. The cubs seemed to take comfort from the light, their earlier terror fading as they looked around with curious eyes. How far do these tunnels go? Sarah asked as they walked deeper into the mountain. No one knows for certain. My people have mapped some of the passages near the surface, but the deep roads, they go down for kilometers. Some say they reach the planet's core. Others believe they connect to tunnels on distant worlds. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's impossible. Is it? The ancestors had technology we can barely imagine. They built these tunnels when my world was young. Perhaps they had reasons we cannot understand. As they traveled deeper, Sarah began to notice something strange about the tunnel walls. The symbols weren't just decorative. They seemed to be telling a story, showing images of creatures she didn't recognize doing things that defied explanation. She saw what looked like star maps, technical diagrams, and scenes of great battles fought between the stars. "What is all this?" she asked, running her fingers over one particularly intricate carving. The Kithira paused to look at the symbols Sarah was examining. A history. The ancestors left records of their time, warnings for those who came after. This section, it speaks of the Grey Hunt, a time when beings like the harvesters came to harvest entire worlds. The ancestors fought them. More than fought, they won, but at great cost. This is why the Guardians still wake when the harvesters return. The forest remembers the ancient war. Sarah studied the carvings more closely. The scenes showed massive battles, weapons that could destroy stars, and fleets of ships beyond counting. But they also showed something else. Cooperation. Different species working together, sharing technology and knowledge to fight a common enemy. They weren't all the same species, she realized. The ancestors were an alliance. The Kithira's golden eyes reflected the tunnel's blue glow. Yes, many peoples, many worlds, all united against the great threat. And in the end, they succeeded. The harvesters were driven back to whatever dark place spawned them. Until now, the Kithira agreed grimly. But the ancestors were wise. They knew the threat might return. That is why they left Guardians, why they built these refuges, why they recorded their knowledge for others to find. As if responding to their conversation, the symbols around them began to pulse with brighter light. New passages became visible, branching off from the main tunnel. Sarah could feel air moving through the depths, carrying strange scents and distant sounds. "Where do we go now?" she asked. But before the Kithira could answer, they heard something that made them all freeze. From somewhere in the tunnels ahead came a sound like metal scraping against stone. And then, echoing through the ancient passages, came a voice that spoke in the crystalline language of the harvesters. They had found another way in. The sound of the harvesters echoing through the ancient tunnels sent ice through Sarah's veins. She pressed herself against the carved wall, feeling the cubs huddle closer to her legs while the adult Kithira's muscles tensed for another fight. "What do they get in?" Sarah whispered. "There are other entrances," the Kithira replied, its voice barely audible. "The ancestors built many ways into the deep roads. Some may not have sealed properly after so many centuries." The crystalline voices were getting closer, accompanied by the mechanical clicking of harvester footsteps on stone. Sarah could see lights moving in the passages ahead, the cold blue glow of their sensors cutting through the ancient darkness. "This way," the Kithira urged, leading them down a side passage marked with different symbols. As they moved deeper into the tunnel system, Sarah began to notice that the carvings on the walls were changing. The stories they told were different here, older somehow. These symbols showed the ancestors not as warriors, but as builders and explorers. She saw images of great machines that could reshape worlds, ships that sail between galaxies, and knowledge that could unlock the secrets of the universe itself. But, most importantly, she saw something that made her heart race with sudden hope. "Stop," she whispered, grabbing the Kithira's armored flank. "Look at this." The carving she was pointing to was larger than the others, carved deep into the stone and filled with precious metals that still gleamed after countless millennia. It showed a chamber filled with crystalline structures, each one pulsing with inner light. Around the crystals stood figures representing dozens of different species. all working together to operate some kind of massive machine. "It's a control room," Sarah breathed. "The ancestors left something here, something that might still work." The Kithira studied the carving with growing excitement. "The heart chamber. My people spoke of it in legends, but I thought it was only myth. They say it lies at the center of all the tunnel networks, where the ancestors placed their greatest weapon." "What kind of weapon?" "Not a weapon for destroying," the Kithira explained, its golden eyes reflecting the carving's metallic inlays. "A weapon for protecting. A way to make the harvesters forget this world exists." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "A cloaking device? For an entire planet?" "Something like that. The legends say the ancestors could hide whole star systems from their enemies, make them invisible to any scan, any sensor, as if they had never been." The sounds of pursuit were getting closer, but Sarah found herself studying the carving with new intensity. If such a device really existed, if it still functioned after all this time, how do we get there? "Follow the deep paths." "But Sarah," the Kithira's voice carried a note of warning. "The legends also say that operating the heart chamber requires a price. The ancestors built it to respond only to those willing to sacrifice everything for others." Before Sarah could ask what that meant, energy beams began carving through the air around them. The harvesters had found their trail again, and this time there was nowhere to run. "Move!" Sarah shouted, grabbing two of the cubs while the adult Kithira took the third. They plunged deeper into the tunnel system, following passages that seemed to spiral down toward the planet's core. The ancient symbols on the walls provided enough light to see by, but they also made it impossible to hide. Every turn revealed new carvings, new stories of the ancestors' incredible civilization. And behind them, the harvesters followed with relentless precision. The pursuit lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The tunnels branched and merged in patterns that seemed almost organic, as if they had grown rather than been carved. Several times, Sarah was sure they had lost their pursuers, only to hear the crystalline voices echoing from unexpected directions. But gradually, she began to notice that they were descending towards something. The air grew warmer, carrying hints of ozone and the deep thrumming of massive machinery. The symbols on the walls grew brighter and more complex until entire sections glowed like captured starlight. And then they emerged into the heart chamber. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The chamber was vast, easily a kilometer across, and carved from what looked like a single, enormous crystal. The ceiling stretched up into darkness beyond the reach of the glowing walls. And at the center of it all stood the device the ancestors had left behind. It was beautiful and alien and terrifying all at once. Crystalline structures reached toward the ceiling like frozen lightning, each one pulsing with colors that had no names in human language. Around the base of the device, Sarah could see control surfaces marked with symbols that seemed to shift and change as she watched. "The heart chamber," the Kithira whispered, all clear in its voice. "It is real." But they weren't alone. As Sarah stepped into the vast space, she saw other figures moving among the crystal formations. At first she thought they were more harvesters, but then she realized the truth was far stranger. They were the Guardians. Not the forest guardians they had encountered above, but something else entirely. Tall, graceful beings that seemed to be made of living light. They moved among the crystals with purpose and intelligence. As Sarah watched, one of them turned toward their small group, and she found herself looking into eyes that held the wisdom of eons. "Welcome, children of the younger races," the Guardian said, its voice like music made from starlight. "We have waited long for someone to find this place." "Your ancestors," Sarah breathed. The Guardian's expression might have been a smile. "We are what remains of them, echoes preserved in crystal and light, waiting for the day when the great threat would return." And now it has. The cubs had stopped trembling and were staring at the Guardians with wonder. Even the adult Kithira seemed calmer in their presence, as if some ancient recognition was stirring in its genetic memory. "Can you help us?" Sarah asked. The harvesters are coming. They want to take the cubs, turn them into weapons. We know, the Guardian replied. We have watched the harvesters return to this sector, harvesting the strong from world after world. Soon they will have enough specimens to begin their great work again. What great work! The Guardian gestured to the crystal formations around them. The harvesters are not the true threat, child. They serve something far older, far more dangerous. Their masters seek to remake the galaxy in their image, to harvest the uniqueness from every species and create a universe of perfect, sterile order. Sarah felt her blood chill. How many worlds do they need for their plan to succeed? Thousands. And they're close to reaching that goal. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber. The harvesters had found them at last. Sarah could see their lights moving in the tunnel entrances that ringed the chamber, at least 30 of them spreading out to surround the central platform. Surrender now, came the voice of the lead harvester, magnified by the crystal acoustics. You have led us to an interesting discovery. Our masters will be pleased to add ancestor technology to their collection. The Guardian turned toward the approaching enemies, and Sarah saw something like sadness in its ancient eyes. The children of the harvest do not learn. They see only what they can take, never what they might lose. Can you activate the planetary cloak? Sarah asked urgently. Hide this world from them. The device requires a conscious choice, the Guardian explained. Someone must interface with the control matrix directly. But the process changes the operator. They become part of the system, eternal guardians like us. Sarah understood now what the Kythera had meant about a price. To save the world, someone would have to give up their own life, their own future. Become a living part of an ancient machine designed to protect worlds they would never see. I'll do it, she said without hesitation. No. The adult Kythera stepped forward, its golden eyes burning with determination. This is my world. My cubs. The sacrifice should be mine. You're injured, Sarah protested, and the cubs need you. I'm just a cargo pilot who got lost. This is my choice. But before either of them could move toward the control matrix, something unexpected happened. The three cubs broke away from their protective circle and ran toward the crystalline device. They were too small to reach the control surfaces, but as they approached, the crystals began to resonate with their presence. Remarkable, the Guardian breathed. The young ones carry genetic memories from the time when our peoples worked together. They remember what was lost. The cubs were making soft, chirping sounds now, and the crystal formations responded by growing brighter. Sarah could feel something stirring in the ancient machinery, power that had slept for millennia beginning to wake. The cubs can activate it? She asked. Together with a willing adult, yes. But the bond must be complete. The operator becomes their permanent guardian, and they become living links to the planetary defense grid. Sarah looked at the three small creatures who had trusted her from the beginning, despite every instinct that should have told them she was prey. She thought about her parents, who had taught her that sometimes the right choice was also the hardest choice. Then, let's do it, she said. The harvesters were advancing now, their weapons powering up for a final assault. But as Sarah placed her hands on the control matrix and felt the cubs pressing against her legs, something wonderful happened. The chamber filled with light. Not the cold blue glow of harvester sensors or the sterile white of human technology, but something warm and alive and infinitely comforting. The crystal formations sang with harmonics that seemed to reach into Sarah's very soul, and she felt herself becoming part of something vast and ancient and protective. Around her, the harvesters stopped their advance. Their leader's voice carried notes of confusion and growing alarm. What is happening? Our sensors are showing impossible readings. The planet is disappearing. Sarah smiled as she felt her consciousness expand to encompass the entire world. She could sense every forest, every mountain, every living creature on the surface. And she could feel the protective barrier spreading outward, wrapping around the planet like a blanket of invisibility. To any external sensors, this world would now appear to be nothing more than empty space. The harvester's ships would find no trace of it, no record that it had ever existed. And the cubs? Sarah looked down at the three small predators who were now glowing with the same warm light that filled the chamber. They were still themselves, still the brave little creatures who had slept peacefully against her legs. But now there were also something more. Living guardians connected to her and to the planetary defense system that would protect their world for millennia to come. The harvest fleet approaches, the Guardian warned. Hundreds of ships carrying thousands of specimens. When they find no trace of this world, what will they do? Sarah considered the question as she felt her human consciousness merging with the ancient ancestor technology. She was still Sarah Chun, cargo pilot and field medic. But she was also something new, something that had never existed before. Human stubbornness and ingenuity joined with Kithira protective instincts and ancestor wisdom. They'll move on to other worlds, she realized. Unless Sarah reached out through the crystal network, feeling for the signal beacons that connected the harvester fleet. If she could access their communication systems, if she could convince their masters that this entire sector was worthless. The other worlds, she said to the Guardian. Can the defense grid be expanded? Can we hide more than just this planet? The Guardian's eyes widened with understanding. The network was designed to be expandable, yes, but it would require Guardians on each world, beings willing to make the same sacrifice you have made. Sarah smiled as she felt the three cubs purring contentedly against her legs. They weren't afraid anymore. They trusted her completely, just as she had come to trust them. Then, I guess we better get started, she said. And in the crystal chamber deep beneath an alien world, a human cargo pilot, three predator cubs, and the echoes of an ancient civilization began the work of protecting the galaxy, one world at a time. The harvesters would find this sector empty when they arrived. But across the stars, other worlds would begin to disappear from their sensors, protected by an expanding network of guardians who had learned that sometimes the greatest strength came from the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. And on those hidden worlds, strange friendships would bloom between species that should have been natural enemies, because a human had once chosen to trust rather than fear, and predator cubs had learned to sleep peacefully in the presence of someone who loved them enough to give up everything to keep them safe.